Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Heaven and Earth podcast. This is a special episode where we're going to be talking more about the mission and the agenda behind the podcast as a whole.
And tell you a little bit more about ourselves as your hosts. Many of you who are watching already know us as teachers or as an astrologer or an herbalist. But if you're coming in new, we'd like to tell you a little bit more about ourselves and our practices and our interests and why we're bringing on the teachers that we're bringing on to talk here on this platform.
Mm-hmm. So right now the moon is in the sign of Leo, and the authenticity, the sincerity, the openness of Leo is great for, you getting to know us more and for us kind of putting ourselves out there, making a splash, doing something for attention. And so it seemed like a good time to do it. And right now the sun is in the sign of Scorpio, just moved into the sign of Scorpio. And so we have a special plant that mushroom that we're working with right now for that.
Yeah, so we're communing with some Birch Polypore, which is a medicine friend that we're kind of just finally working with really in depth in the material world, because we just had the opportunity to harvest a bunch of beautiful specimens up in Cook Forest in the old growth on our annual fall mushroom medicine making trip.
Mm-hmm. This is every fall around like late September we go into the old growth in Pennsylvania and find as many mushrooms as we possibly can. And I feel like each year we go, we have a lot of fun, but also one mushroom will start to kind of call out to us more. 2 years ago it was wild lion's mane, bear's tooth. This time it was birch polypore, and we've been looking for birch polypore for years, and then suddenly this year we found tons of it. And so it just seemed like the perfect medicine for what we needed. And we were super thrilled.
Yeah, and it aligns really well with Scorpio season because it's, great for digestive cleansing, anti-parasitic, part of that fall cleanse cycle, and also a really beautiful immune booster and immune tonic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is the goal behind the Heaven and Earth podcast? We define it as introducing all of you to effective teachers and practices that can help you to connect with your divine spiritual essence. For me, I think especially in terms of what is effective, I've got a Capricorn stellium, so I'm always interested in practicality. I know there's so many practices being peddled out there. There's so many people, so many other podcasts out there, all kind of fighting for a little chunk of people's attention. And we know at least that the practices that we'll give you here, that we talk about here, if you do them, they will work. And so, I think feel really good and trust in the effectiveness of this podcast, and know that what we have you here will transform your life. And that's a big goal, at least that I have behind it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you could treat this podcast as something that has been well vetted, that we can bring to you teachers who have had, a lot of experience, who are authentic in why they're doing what they're doing. They're doing it because they want to make a better world and they genuinely want to help people, right? Rather than just, again, scooping up that time and attention in the virtual space in order to, in order to peddle something to you. There's also a lot of people in the online space who are teaching practices that they haven't actually spent much time with, that they hear about, they read about, they get excited about, maybe they practice it for a year or two, and then teach it without actually knowing, long term and in various different bodies how these practices work, right? Yep. So the teachers that we bring on and the practices that we're doing have been vetted through, decades of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can trust in that for anybody that we bring on an interview. Yeah. Crystal will talk a lot in terms of the goal of a spiritual practice being to help you rediscover the art of being human, which I think has been lost a lot in this contemporary lifestyle that we all live in.
Yeah, exactly. In capitalism, they don't want you to know these ancient and powerful tools of being human, but they were things that our ancestors knew for a really long time, like how to connect with plants, how to time your life according to the seasons, the cycles, and the stars, how to gain knowing from each cell in your body, how to follow your heart. They're essential things that empower you to know who you are, what your place is in the world, and what your purpose is. Like both the purpose of being human, which we believe is connecting the heavens and the earth, connecting the realms, helping to co-create with the divine force and awake that divine force within us, and also who you are individually, what your particular piece of this beautiful celestial web is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think closely related to that, I think in terms of helping people to awaken to their power, their divine power.
Mm-hmm.
And we all carry a spark of divine essence with us. And I think civilization, capitalism, even just our kind of the own process of forgetting by being born, certain things happen to cause us to lose touch with that. And you find the right practices, you find the right teachers, then you can rediscover your power. We're both very much in the business of empowerment, showing you how to do things, how to find the skill, the wisdom within yourself, so that you can, take charge of your life and then ultimately use that same wisdom to help other people do the same.
So some of the teachers that we'll be bringing on and some of the practices that we'll be talking about range from, as we mentioned, herbalism, and there are many different ways to practice herbalism, and there's many different facets of herbalism, right? And so we'll be trying to cover a lot of those from folk diagnostic techniques that you can work with, ways to connect with the spirits of the plants, ways to dream with the plants, ways to grow the plants, how to find the plants, putting together formulations, to Matthew's field of astrology, which is also a little more vast and complex than a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, so astrology definitely involves like reading natal charts is a big part of that, and that's what most people think of when they think of astrology. But also timing in general being a big part of this practice. Timing everything from when you pick your herbs to when you do magical rituals to when you have a wedding and so on. Also, predictive elements and knowing what kinds of ebbs and flows are happening in your own life, but also for the collective too. I get a sense for like what kind of roller coaster ride you're going to be hopping into. I think both the Western herbalism that Crystal practices and the astrology that I practice are rooted within kind of catch-all phrase Western esoteric tradition. This is, practices, approaches, methods within the kind of, occult Western lineage that is rooted in kind of Greco-Egyptian, Mesopotamian tradition techniques. And so that's a lot of what we do. We're very much in that vein. If you think like Hermeticism, if you're familiar with that term, of astrology, alchemy, herbalism, and ritual magic, and theurgy, which is ritual magic for contacting gods, essentially.
Becoming a god yourself.
And becoming a god yourself, or what's known as theosis in ancient Greek. In addition to the Western esoteric tradition stuff, Crystal also brings in a lot of yoga and yogic traditions too.
And some of the yoga and somatic techniques in general. We also are interested in, some of the teachers, like as we already brought in, Jason Drebnak, we're very interested in what would be called primitive skills or earth skills, survival skills.
Bushcraft, that kind of stuff.
Those are really essential and foundational pieces to learning how to be human, is learning those skills and having that knowledge, like in your hands, in your flesh, and in your bones of what kept your ancestors alive. Right? Because what kept your ancestors alive is what also made their lives beautiful, enjoyable, fulfilling, and what connected them to their spirits and their communities. So we really believe strongly also in sharing those skills and sharing skills of embodiment, art, creativity, the power of the word.
Yeah, and then also under the umbrella of somatic practices be, a lot of the Taoist techniques and Taoist approaches that I bring, Qigong, Tai Chi, Bagua circle walking, this kind of stuff. It's, between yoga, and the Taoist practices, really anything that you can do to get yourself more in your body and feel the energy that is already in your body is great for a myriad of things, from just getting rid of chronic pain to starting to access and harness the inner alchemical ingredients that you have within your body to prepare your vessel for enlightenment and ascension and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And a lot of these, when we refer to magical practices or ritual practices, which, you know, are intertwined with, which at once upon a time was intertwined with every aspect of our lives, right? We would invite you to think of these practices, whether the magic, the ritual, the what we've sometimes referred to as the occult, as ways that you can escape consensual or linear time and space, right? It's the creation of a new kind of time and space, in a similar way, that you experience when you're dreaming, right? It's creating that same, not only mindset, and you can think of it as brainwaves, but it's a different level of consciousness, a different kind of consciousness where more is possible, and where more of the invisible realm and your allies and your guides are able to access you. And so these are very real techniques, very real technologies. We're excited about talking about them, and we're excited about bringing in teachers who are even further along in the process than we are to talk to you.
Oh, yeah. One thing that came to mind for me with that, you know, just knowing how real this stuff can be, something that's said a lot within kind of like Taoist Qigong circles is that qi is not subtle. For instance, like it might start out as like a light tingly feeling or something as you're practicing, but over time it becomes very tangible, very palpable. And the same thing for ritual magic, the same thing for connecting with plant spirits, the same thing for dream work. You know, it might start out like, you know, open, you know, more lucidity, starting to feel something. And then in time, you know, it can become these like extremely powerful transformative practices, and where there's no doubt in your mind of the power of the magic that you are harnessing and bringing in. You see it, you feel it, and it really becomes a part of you in a powerful way.
Yeah, and what we've noticed, like, so for Matthew and I, what we've seen in the, you know, what you want to say, like, New Age realms, occult realms, mindfulness realms, is that there's a lot of information about beginning stages, like how to start this. And there's some information about getting beyond that and stabilizing a practice, but there's not a lot of spaces where you get to talk to people who have gotten to really advanced stages.
Mastery.
Right?
Who, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Who are like encouraging you to, you know, like you know, we had Eric on, who's, you know, one of our favorite teachers in that space, but it's like, no, really, actually, you can control the weather.
Yeah.
No, really, actually, you could start a fire with the palm of your hands. And yeah, it's not easy, and you're going to have to spend a long time doing it, but it is possible. And I feel like we need more of those teachers, and we need more of those spaces that are like, no, really, you can be a fully empowered divine force here on this world.
Yeah.
And do it in a good way.
Yeah.
Right? Like leading with your heart, not in a
controlling, manipulative way,
dirty way.
Yeah. So you know, it's
which is more common.
So if you're listening to like, you know, that's a new idea for you. Know that is all very real. You know, the elemental mastery that we just talked about is extremely real, and you can access it. It's not a metaphor. You know, it's not some kind of like just mental shift that happens from some kind of inner realization. It's that, but it can also be so much more than that too, and
we've seen it and experienced it.
Yeah, with
teachers and
it's
for ourselves 2 degrees.
Yes, well, and that's all I'll say about that. But you know, it's this is, you know, this is a firsthand experience for us. We're telling you that this is all extremely real, and you can get it, and that it doesn't, as Crystal said, it's not dirty. And really, a lot of that kind of skill as a magician, as a witch, is part of an important calling, and you know, vital part of the calling. And you don't think of like magic as control. I think of it, at least as when it's being done right, as right relationship. When it's being done from the heart, it's right relationship. And there's things that you can do, balancing relationships, healing the earth, healing other spirits, healing communities and human communities, that you can only do when you have access to that kind of magical power. And that's not necessarily everybody's calling, but if you're listening to this, then there's a good chance that it is your calling. So just affirm for you that, you know, the sky is the limit with the kind of skill that you can achieve. And some of the people that we're bringing on here, all the people to some extent, one way or another, have achieved that kind of skill.
And they're grounded people, right? Like you might hear this, the thing is like you might actually hear this conversation in other realms, but oftentimes you're hearing it along with, some fear-based conspiracy theory about the Anunnaki, yes, right? And not saying the Anunnaki aren't there, right? But it's like we are very interested in extremely grounded, disciplined practices that are here and present, awake, see the problems of the world, acknowledge the needs of the body and the practicality of living and consensus reality. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm trying to get across here?
Clear. Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah, it's not, or whether it's Anunnaki or debating like which star systems are good or bad, like whatever. Like there's people can get all kinds of weird things.
Getting caught up, lost in past lives.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Or where you're from in the stars. It's like, well, you're here now. You have this body. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts and the required daily hours that you're going to have to build to, as you put it, whether it's stabilizing chi, or whether it's being able to feel the 3 feet energetic field around you and get intimately acquainted with how the hows and whys of what's happening in that space. Hopefully that's also clear.
I think that's extremely clear. Yeah. And so you'll notice like you can be that connected and empowered while also being like grounded and centered and being able to have a conversation with people with presence.
And the teachers that we bring on are those people.
Yeah. They're not going to be all over the place. They're going to know, there's they embody like a level of mundaneness to it. Yeah. Even. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Not saying that we don't all have our
wild
our spacey moments and our wild moments, but I think it's important to teach from that. Your teachers be coming from a grounded and practical space. As
for sure,
my Capricorn husband keeps me in that space if I get tempted, because it is extremely tempting to go into those flighty spaces, and which means you're taking shortcuts. Yeah. Right. You're not grounding. You're not integrating, and you're taking shortcuts. You're going to a few too many ayahuasca ceremonies without actually doing the integration and embodiment work that's needed after that. And we have been in spaces where we've been going to too many ayahuasca ceremonies. Yeah. So not saying that's not a necessary part of the process too.
Yeah, we've done it too. Make sure you're always grounding as much as you can with that. One final thing I will add to that is that as you're getting in this path, or deepening your path with this, is for things like the flighty spaces and whatnot. The general principle: if it can come quickly, it can go quickly.
Oh, so, good.
Yeah, I say that again. If it can come quickly, it can go quickly. Yeah, it's a big thing in the Taoist approach. That's why the Taoist approach is so incremental, step by step. That your best, most grounded, stable practice to get you to embody the mage, witch, druid, magic user that you want to become is through stable, step-by-step, incremental development. And that will much more quickly in the long run get you to where you want to be.
And create more control around it as well, right?
Yeah, it does create, so where you can be kind of conscious and turn on your astral sight versus suddenly finding yourself like in the ethers and just getting all of these messages and whatnot that you don't necessarily have much of a say in.
Yeah, right. And so you'll notice that we hold two kind of different poles. Sometimes they shift, but Matthew's much more on like the mage side of things, which is like all about, and we're in both camps to a certain extent, but there's a tendency to be, the mage is very much about will, right? And exerting one's will, developing control and having say. And then there's the mystic path, which is much more surrendered. You could think of it as yin and yang, which is accepting, allowing things to come, allowing things to come from you, allowing things to come to you, opening yourself up to what's present, and not necessarily trying to force anything, but rather than just, unify with the now of the moment. And almost everything can be approached from both sides, right? And it's a matter of, which which side needs toned.
Yeah, which you feel more of a calling to which
Yeah.
one resonates with you more.
And so
It's all pretty clear.
I feel like this is a good time to talk about. We wanted to discuss a little bit just about the traditions that we talked about the practices that we're going to be developing, and we've mentioned some of the traditions, but kind of just letting you know and listing off some of the traditions that we've been trained in and the viewpoints that we are bringing to the table
Yeah.
here in Heaven and Earth.
Yeah, so we've both had extensive training within the Western esoteric tradition, astrology, herbalism, ritual magic. Crystal is the herbal master, and I tend to focus more on the astrology. But we
both do both.
We both do both. I think you do more astrology than I do herbalism. I will get there once I have more time.
I'm also almost 10 years older than him.
Yeah, and you certainly have a leg up on me in that way. And then additionally, I do some yoga as part of my practice, but a lot of what I bring to the table is the Taoist approach. I'm initiated into the Chuanjun, the Dragon Gate sect, 24th generation, and I also have a medical Qigong certificate from there, and also through Eric Randolph that we had on earlier. And that we talked about kind of like the approach for Taoism. There's a lot of ritual magic and that kind of thing in Taoism too that I also practice, and energy healing and that sort of thing.
Internal alchemy.
Internal alchemy being a big part of it. And then that's probably the main one in addition to Western esotericism.
And Celtic and Druidic and Northern European folk practices.
That's right, yes. And as
and we've both done a lot of studies, a lot of research, a lot of connecting with our mutual ancestry on that side for a lot of years. Honestly, like a lot of people, since you were children, really connected with the, global mythologies, folk traditions of, I guess mostly for us, Northern Europe, but also I guess Southern Europe with the Greek and...
Yep, Greco-Egyptian.
Yeah. I was studying Greco-Roman and Greco-Egyptian magic in some depth when I was in my undergrad, and I believe you have as well.
Yeah, a lot of the ritual magic that we teach is in the Greco-Roman or Greco-Egyptian vein, which in a way is kind of like a European, you could consider it like a sort of European folk tradition too, but much more kind of codified and formalized than say like paganism or like Norse paganism or like that kind of thing, Celtic paganism.
We do not practice Golden Dawn, and we intentionally do not practice Golden Dawn or Kabbalah now. I'm not saying we don't find those valuable traditions. We are just we're both extremely interested in recovering those traditions more from their folk roots than how they were codified and passed down by the aristocracy.
Yes.
Which we find that there's a lot that we just generally don't agree with. And going back into the research, as you probably know, Matthew is an ancient Greek scholar. He's also a Sanskrit scholar. So going back into the old text to trying to find the places where, patriarchy, hierarchy, capital, the latent capitalism and colonialism kind of stripped away some of the parts of the tradition that are actually really powerful. Like the earlier the myth, the earlier the text, actually the more empowered the feminine is, and the more connected to its folk like earthy roots it is. So we're both interested in going back to even like for me, I really enjoy reading the pre-Socratic philosophers, and get a lot from those texts, like going back to Empedocles.
Yeah,
Empedocles, and sure. You don't find that in just fine.
Not as present in sort of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
Vein.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we each have a deep practice connecting with our ancestors and with, I think, Western paganism, witchcraft, that kind of thing. There is always an element of reclamation and recovery. And we found that you find very, very similar techniques and technologies from around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, the technology is the technology independent of the culture to a certain
Absolutely.
extent. Far more similarities and overlap than there are differences. And so we've, kind of pieced or filled in the gaps a little bit in our own practice with things that we've studied elsewhere. We've been given that advice too by other practitioners and like
By
different folk
elders.
traditions, and by elders as well.
Yeah.
If you could want to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I've spent I've been practicing yoga since before it was fashionable.
Before it was cool.
I'm 40 years old, and I've been practicing since I was 17. In some ways, I've been teaching for a very long time, and I've studied a lot of different branches of yoga, from Kundalini to Yin, which is very Taoist influenced and informed, to Bikram, which comes from the Ghosh lineage, and things that I've found there have greatly informed the way that I work with my body and general somatic practices. And I've found that particular technology of yoga, of grounding into the body and kind of being able to live more from the intelligence of the cell in the field, is something that is present in a lot of indigenous practices in a way, if you know how to listen, but it's a lot harder to glean. But that idea of blending those two different traditions, right, can be done in a not great way, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like something that I'm almost, I'm hesitant to talk about my background in yoga. I'm hesitant to talk about my background in working with indigenous practices, even though I feel really good about the ways that I've learned from my indigenous elders. I lived and volunteered on the Ahanktawan reservation, for months, and I've donated to and volunteered a lot of my time in ceremonial spaces with the Anishinaabe, with the Nakota. I feel really good about the relationships that I formed there, but it's not something that I talk about a lot. It's rather something that I embody and that I work with in these other traditions and in these veins. Even though I've earned names. I've fasted from food and water in extenuating circumstances for 4 days at a time. I've done things to quote unquote earn rights in those communities, and I feel really good about my mastery of skills in those different technologies. But there's something that, due to the fact that can be done in a really bad way and is done in a really bad way in popular culture, that I'm going to try to hold with as much integrity as I can. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So just saying those things inform us, and we'll be bringing on teachers from those traditions, to just explaining that that's how I feel about the whole appropriation conversation in general, that I would rather do the quote unquote integration work of teaching those technologies and teaching those skills through a ancestral lens that I feel good about. Even though I will say, put it out there, I'm from one of those backwoods Appalachian communities that I have my grandmother, she straightforwardly looks native, her grandfather was a native man, but I'm completely disconnected from that story. Like, she barely knew him because her mother was sent off to live with a relative when she was, I think, 13 or 14 years old. So I have that. There's a link there. There's a passion there, but it's something culturally I'm completely separated from.
Yeah, it's the question of indigenous practice and white people doing indigenous practice is, of course, a very, very thorny one. We could say that all of our background experience with that has been in instances where we've been invited to participate in that by indigenous people, and who, we'll have some on too, I think is the plan.
Yeah.
And, no, it's a wonderful to learn from them and learn from their practices if that door is open and they're willing to teach. And our experience has been that oftentimes they are willing to. Not always, but oftentimes they are.
Yeah. And we wanted to talk about the issue of integrating traditions and what's called syncretism a little bit as well.
Yes, yeah. So basically, syncretism is the norm. And also, historically speaking, yes. And I'll joke and I'll tell people, you show me a pure tradition, and I'll show you something that at least 1,000 years ago was syncretized. And that is what it is. And it's not until relatively recently in human history that questions of syncretism and keeping things authentic became very important, and a lot of times it's rooted in fear. But historically speaking, I think the oldest ones that tradition that is worried about syncretism and talks about syncretism is Catholicism, because for them it's you're either doing this in Christianity, you're doing it this way, or you're a pagan,
which is a tool of empire.
It is a tool of empire, and it's a tool. I mean, anything that's kind of obsessed with purism and purity is definitely suspect.
Empire. Colonizing.
Yes. Again, leading into fascism, and there's a whole political thing that you could do talking about that. But especially Western esoteric traditions, a lot of Taoist lineages, there's lots of different techniques and approaches that they are drawing from, and there is more of an excitement about what new things you can learn from other approaches than there is some sense of maintaining your pure tradition. And so syncretism is the norm, essentially, and you just find techniques that work.
So we're talk a little bit about, Hermeticism is incredibly syncretized.
Yeah, the Western esoteric tradition was birthed from a bunch of Arabs, Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Persians, and Jews all living in Alexandria together sharing notes. And that's the foundation.
But even before that, those traditions were already ripping off of each other.
Yes. There's so much conversation
Their names
that was
of
happening.
God, yeah.
Yeah, so this overlap between the names of God, even conversations that were happening between people in Greece and people in India as late as the 8th century BC. And the fact that all of the...
So yoga is already influenced by the Greeks.
And likewise, ancient practices in India influenced the West too. There's references in the Picatrix, which is a seminal text of Western magic, to the way that ancient Indians were practicing. There's always conversation. And so don't think of syncretism as a bad thing. You find ways and methods that work. And more than often than not, complete practices from culture to culture to culture, again, have more in common than they do, different, because the technologies are the technologies.
When the culture finds something that works, they use it. Yeah. It's just it's genetic evolution.
Yeah, it's a different question if a particular culture is saying, we don't want you to use our practices. Then don't do it. That's fine. But that's a different thing, and it's a new phenomenon, relatively speaking.
And a Greek wouldn't practice something from India and then say they're an Indian.
That too. They didn't,
right? It doesn't change like that. There's a difference between cultural identity.
Yeah.
Right, and claiming authority and humans are humans.
Yeah, it's, but you say for us, we're Americans, and we practice things that have been given to us by teachers all over the world. But that doesn't make us anything other than of course being Americans. But it just it just is what it is. You find approaches that work for you and people who are happy to share them, and you'll find them.
Yeah.
I think we should wrap up. We're kind of over the half-hour point now. Yeah.
Well, do we want to talk about our practices?
No, I think they kind of get a sense for our practices now.
Okay.
We'll move,
Yeah, okay, great.
We each do 2 hours and more meditation a day.
Or more meditation and spiritual practice, contemplative reflection, somatics. Yeah. Maybe we can do a session on practices another day. But what we would love to hear from you is, where are you coming from? What what practices are you interested in? What techniques and technologies are you excited about? We told you about us. We'd love to open up the space in the comments for you to talk about you. If there's anything in particular that you'd be excited to hear us talk about, or any particular teachers from any of the different traditions that we've talked about, that we can bring on.
Yeah, and we do read the comments. We'd love to see what you guys are writing, and we do interact with you. And additionally, this is the Heaven and Earth podcast. This is named for the school that we run, the School of Heaven and Earth. And in the school, we teach all of these things that we're talking about with you here. And we'll put a link in there if it's something that you're interested in learning more about. We give people a very sort of simple, accessible curriculum and community that they can use to practice the things that we ourselves practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do full and new moon rituals. We work with a different plant for every moon cycle. I also run the what's called Sybil's Cave, where we practice dreamwork, channeling, poetry, and other word technologies.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And blessings. Be well.
Yeah, blessings. See you next time.
See you next time.